Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As you're getting logged on for the Hawkeyes Give Back Talk, Philanthropy for Social Change, we'll be getting started shortly here. But as we wait for other folks to join, please take a moment to answer our poll that we have for you. This will give us a better idea. Holly just put it in the chat, and closed captioning will be available during this event. We look forward to meeting with you. Okay, everybody. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome for the Hawkeyes Give Back Philanthropy Talk. My name is Lucas DeWitt. I serve as the president for the Student Advancement Network here at the University of Iowa. University of Iowa students who join the Student Advancement Network serve as selective representatives of the student body to network with University of Iowa alumni and donors. We also educate our peers about the importance of philanthropy and engagement, their different forms, and how they can give back as Hawkeyes. Before we get started, I do have a few technical items to take note. Participant microphones are automatically muted upon entry, and videos are automatically off. But we would love to hear from you, so we encourage, if you can look at the bottom of your screen, to use the Q&A feature to share any questions that you have for our panelists today. We want to make sure that this is accessible and you get all of your questions answered as possible, so please feel free to take part in that. You can access the Q&A feature by clicking the Q&A icon and typing a question into the text box. Questions will be monitored throughout the event, so you may submit questions on an ongoing basis, and they will be covered during our Q&A session towards the end of this hour. Now, to get started with our event, it is my honor to invite the University of Iowa President, Bruce Harold, to share some remarks. Bruce?
Thank you, Lucas. And thank you all for joining us. As you all saw in that opening question that we all took part in, there's a misconception, I believe, in many ranks. Most of you don't fall into that rabbit hole where people think that philanthropy is all about the money. No, nothing could be further from the truth. You're going to hear four great panelists talk about what they're passionate about. Philanthropy is about you and what you're interested in. And there's so many ways beyond the money to get involved. I would just strongly encourage all of you to think about whatever it is that you're passionate about and get involved. And as you get involved, you'll start finding people that have similar experiences and values and interests. You'll start building a network. You'll start feeling engaged. And you'll start, most importantly, do what I think Hawkeyes do really well. You'll start making a difference. And if at some point in your life you actually have the opportunity to contribute fiscally, by all means do so. But it's about you. And you're going to feel remarkably good about it, I believe, as you get into what you're passionate about. And I think at the end of the day, Hawkeyes make a difference in the world. So thank you very, very much for joining us. I think you're going to really find these four panelists quite interesting in the variety of things that they're engaged in. And you'll see their energy and enthusiasm come through. So thank you once again. Lucas, back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, President Harold. This afternoon, we are here to celebrate four Hawkeyes that are giving back and learn how they use philanthropy to foster social change. So I will quickly go through the four panelists that we have today and then make sure that we give plenty of time for you to hear from all four of them. But first, we do have Brett Burk, who works for the Iowa Safe Schools. It is a statewide LGBTQ nonprofit that provides supportive learning environments for LGBTQ and allied youth through education, outreach, advocacy, and direct services. He's also served as an ESL teacher, a caretaker for adults with disabilities, and a refugee community engagement professional. Our second panelist today is Jonathan Chaparro. Jonathan leads the Chicago region of Braven, which is a national organization that empowers underrepresented youth with the skills, confidence, and experience necessary to transition from college to professional workforce. He has worked for various nonprofit and corporate organizations, including Teach for America and McKinsey Company. Our third panelist is RaQuishia Harrington. RaQuishia is the first Black woman elected to the North Liberty City Council and is program supervisor for special and underserved populations with the city of Iowa City. She co-founded the Sankofa Outreach Connection, a nonprofit that supports women of color and is active with various community committees, including Iowa Valley Habitat for Humanity and the Iowa Children's Museum. And then finally, we have Stacey Walker. Stacey is a Lynn County supervisor whose writing has been featured in Little Village Magazine, Quartz Magazine, and The Root, which is an online magazine created by the Washington Post. He worked for the Case Foundation and launched the LBA Foundation, which is an education-based nonprofit that helps at-risk students stay on course to graduation. Now, moderating our conversation today is our esteemed Lynette Marshall, who is the president and CEO of the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. And at this time, Lynette, if you want to get things started, I'll mute myself.
All right, thank you so much, Lucas, and welcome to all of our panelists today. It's really a joy to have you, and welcome to our audience. We appreciate very much you spending some time with us this afternoon. It's become a tradition for us to gather and to celebrate Hawkeyes who give back to Iowa and to their communities, wherever that might be. And I appreciate President Harold reminding us that there are so many ways to be generous with our time and talent. While we can't be together in person today, which we would love more than anything else, we felt like it was still quite important for us to be able to come together virtually to continue this important conversation about philanthropy and the many ways that someone can make a difference. The University of Iowa has had a long tradition of excellence, as all of you know, in education, in research, and in patient care, with our University of Iowa hospitals and clinics and the College of Dentistry. That excellence is fueled by the generosity of generations of people who care deeply about the University of Iowa. And while it's easy to recognize some of the philanthropy at work in our buildings and on our campus monuments, our alumni and friends and donors make a difference in lots of different ways. By offering support to the faculty and their cutting-edge research, by sharing expertise in the classroom, by providing resources for innovative programs throughout the campus, and even by creating scholarships for our students, which is so important these days. We know that philanthropy in all of its forms is a powerful tool for leveraging change. It's true both on campus and around the world. I'm grateful today for our panelists to be able to spend some time and share how their work in philanthropy is effecting change in our society. So again, thanks to our panelists. We'll ask them to bring up their videos. And I'd like to invite each of you to take a moment to talk just a little bit about your background. Lucas gave us a little bit of your work history, but tell us a little bit about your background and also about your experience at Iowa, and then perhaps a sentence or two about your current professional pursuits. And I'd like to start with Jonathan, please.
Sure thing. So hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Chaparro. I graduated from the University of Iowa in 2008 from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I also completed the entrepreneurial management program with the John Papajohn Entrepreneurial Center, that's part of TIPI. And I had an incredible experience at Iowa. I was actively involved with Dance Marathon, with the Homecoming Council, student government. I was a part of fraternity Phi Kappa Psi, where I was really involved with our philanthropic efforts. I was an RA in Hillcrest. And I think what's interesting is that through all of that involvement, I was able to gain a lot of just leadership skills and was able to form values that really shaped my career to this day. I was a first generation college student at Iowa. And, I was very fortunate in that I found a very supportive community, within the university. And it is because of that I, ended up working now for an organization that helps first generation college students across the country develop the skills, the mindsets, and the experiences that they need to successfully transition from college into the professional workforce so that they land jobs that will put them on a path to upward economic mobility. And so really delighted to be with you all and excited for today's conversation.
And are you joining us today from Chicago, where you live?
I am not. So while Chicago is home, I made the decision to head a little further south to Puerto Rico. My parents now live in Puerto Rico, and so I'll be here through December, which is amazing right now.
Since we had snow in Iowa yesterday, I thought I'd just point that out. Thanks, Jonathan.
It was 86 today.
Brett, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brett Burk. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Iowa Safe Schools here in Des Moines. I graduated in 2014 with a degree in linguistics and TESOL. I had an amazing experience at the university. I grew up in rural Iowa. I grew up poor and gay in rural Iowa. So I really jumped at the chance to go to the University of Iowa. I want to tell a little story. I remember Googling gay Iowa when I was like 16 years old, and what came up was the LGBTQ Resource Center at the university. And I remember taking a tour with my parents on campus and going past the Resource Center and just knowing that this was a place that was safe and affirming for me. So after a couple more years, I ended up at the university and started working at the LGBTQ Resource Center, wanted to give back to the community, and started trying to get involved with as many different things as I could. Growing up in rural Iowa, it's very isolated, never really left the state, so wanted to meet new people, get involved with international programs. I studied abroad, which was really important to me. And kind of like my capstone, when I was leaving, I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to go to Taiwan upon graduation, which was really amazing and gave me those tools that you need to reflect on your life growing up. I like studying abroad is so important. I think a lot of people should try to leave their community so they can see what else is out there, because then you have that chance to reflect and really see what can be built upon in your home community, what can be better, how can we get more people involved in issues and bring new things into our communities. So that's what I try to do at Iowa Safe Schools now, is get more people involved, bring in new innovative ideas that other communities are doing. And the University of Iowa is really instrumental in developing myself as a person and helping me build leaders out of LGBTQ youth that I work with now.
We're so glad that you found the University of Iowa. Thank you. Thank you. RaQuishia, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here as a panelist today. It's a great honor to be here. My name is RaQuishia Harrington. I am an Iowa native. I grew up just north of here in Waterloo, Iowa. I come from a very large family. My mom is the youngest of 13 and the only one that was born in Iowa. So this has been our home for a all of my life, but this has been home. I was not unfamiliar with the University of Iowa. I had older cousins that came here as well prior to me coming. And so my journey began an introduction to the University of Iowa. I had my oldest daughter at a very young age. I was still in high school. And so as I prepared for graduation, my parents told me that I could look for a school, but it had to be somewhere close where they could drive. My ideal was to move far away from home, right? And possibly be somewhere a lot warmer than Iowa where we get snow in October. But so I ended up choosing to come here to the University of Iowa. I started my career studying pre-med and nursing. And as would have you, my major changed and I ended up pursuing a degree in therapeutic recreation, which was still fairly new here. But I knew I enjoyed working with people and I was very hands-on with that. So anything that I could do to assist people to be more self-sufficient in their living is what I wanted to continue to do. And that seemed to just make the most sense. I could work in a clinical setting or community. I chose to work and focus more on community, and that was a result of me choosing to my work study while I was at the university, and I got to be more surrounded by the community outside of just campus, and it just opened my world up to so many things and built so many connections in terms of what was needed outside of just me being a student on the university campus. I built a family and a community on campus as well, but to be able to connect those two pieces is what ultimately helped me make this my home as well and made me want to stay here and continue that journey. So me starting out as a college student trying to raise my family, I learned about the university and every program and opportunity I had, but I also learned about what I could do as a student and how I can bring more people to volunteer off campus as well and be a part of the greater community. It also instilled in me value for education and what I wanted to instill and how I wanted to instill those things in my children. And gratefully, like my oldest daughter ended up graduating from the university as well. So not only did I graduate from the university, but I guess dragging her to class so many times as a young person paid off because she ended up attending the university as well. So that's a little bit about me. And again, thank you for having me today.
That's a real moment of pride when your child graduates from your alma mater, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you so much, RaQuishia. Stacey, tell us about your path.
Well, yeah, thank you all for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you to have this conversation. I was born and raised in Cedar Rapids, which isn't too far away from Iowa City, where the university is located. I was raised in the southeast side of town, at first to a single mother. And I lost my mother when I was 4 years old, and my sister and I went to live with our grandmother, who continued to raise us. And she believed in education. I wasn't the first person in my family to go to college, but I was among a small group of firsts, individuals to go to college. And what was important to my grandmother and many other folks in my life was that I would find a major that would allow me to be successful upon graduation. And that translates into, is this going to be a major that will allow you to get a job and make some money to pay off your student loans? And I know that, you know, particularly a lot of first generation students get that sort of instruction, if you will, from people who care about them in their life. And I understand that. And for me, it was, you know, I was either going to study business and get a law degree or do one or the other. But my heart was in political science. And so when I got to the University of Iowa, I had to take some general education courses. And I took a few courses in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and I took a course called Intro into American Politics, which was taught by Perverell Squire, who is no longer at Iowa. I believe he went to the University of Missouri to run their political science department there. And that course changed my life. It was one of the few courses at Iowa where I sat in the front of the large lecture hall, and I did pretty well. I did very well in that course, and I did very well because political science was what I really wanted to study, but I had been encouraged to study other things. And I was kind of off to the races. I've been involved in politics and public service in one way or the other ever since. And I guess the lesson, and I'll shut up after this, but for those students who are tuning in, please, 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 please study what it is that sets your soul on fire, even if it means getting a minor, if you have to major in something else. But study what it is that sets your soul on fire, because you will find that you can make money doing just about anything in this life. And so you might as well make money doing something you're passionate about and will allow you a life of meaning. So thank you.
Such tremendous advice. Thank you, Stacey. And we're glad that you found political science and have been able to serve the public for a good number of years already. So thank you for that. Jonathan, I'd like to go back to you. So you talked about growing up in Chicago, and I wonder as you've gone through your career, if you really felt compelled to go back to Chicago to do your nonprofit work, particularly in that home community.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Throughout my undergraduate career, I thought that I was going to work in business, that the bulk of my career would be spent in the private sector. And then senior year of college, I heard about Teach for America. And that changed just a lot of the ways in which I was thinking about my career. I ended up being placed in Chicago, so I was fortunate enough to go back, to my home, to experience life in a different neighborhood than the one that I grew up in, but very similar in many ways. I grew up in the Pilsen and Little Village neighborhoods of Chicago, both of which are working class communities. I mentioned earlier, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so when I heard about Teach for America's mission, it really resonated with me because, I had spent 4 incredible years learning from some of the best faculty, having some incredible experiences, building, amazing friendships. And I felt like I wanted more people like me to have access to that same opportunity. And so that's really what sparked my desire to be a part of Teach for America. And, I'll be honest, right? A lot of my time in college, I think back to some of the mindsets that I had, and I had this idea that, the best work in the private sector. And as I spent time in the nonprofit space, and as I spent time really understanding some of the just issues facing, our communities, I realized that we need more strong talent in the nonprofit space, right? And so that's really what compelled me to build a longstanding career in the nonprofit sector, was because time and time again, I kept seeing top talent not stay in the nonprofit space. And frankly, I did my own career pivot, and I spent, a short time in the for-profit sector. And just realized that for me, having a strong sense of mission alignment was critical. I realized that for me, philanthropy was more than just writing a check, was more than just volunteering an hour or two. For me, it was a way of life. I wanted to make sure that everything that I was doing, as part of my quote unquote 9 to 5 was in service of others. And that's really why I ended up joining the organization that I'm a part of now. It was rooted in that value that I have.
Thank you. That's very insightful. RaQuishia, I want to go back to you. So much of your work has been on behalf of underserved populations. What advice would you have for students or alums who might want to be advocates, and how could they become more involved?
Like you said, I spent most of my career working with underserved populations, underrepresented groups, to advocate for them. One thing that Jonathan just mentioned in working in nonprofit or, boots on the ground, you notice that there's not a lot of representation. There's not a lot of voices speaking on behalf of the people that they're serving. And so my recommendation would be for people who are wanting to be advocates, don't silence the voice of the people who you're trying to help. Like, give them a platform, give them an opportunity to speak their own truths. You can open the door for them to make a path for them to get there, but don't try to speak on their behalf. It's something about shared experiences where I know that I can share or recall situations that I've experienced that may relate very well to the people that I'm advocating for, but I can't take their personal stories. I just can't do that. And I think that oftentimes things get moved a little faster, or people are more considerate when they hear those personal stories. The other thing I want to say that oftentimes in my work, I've realized that students would come and say, hey, we're doing this research or we're doing this study, and we want to get some information from the people in the community. And they gather those stories, but then they disappear, and there's no real change that comes about from what they gathered. There may be a report, there may be some story, it may make the news, a headline, and that's it, but there's no real change that comes after that. So I would encourage anyone that's looking to be an advocate or to work in communities, either on campus or outside of campus, make sure that when you do that work, that you leave something to continue on for years to come, for it to grow and expand, so that real change is coming. Because obviously you're fighting for something. You want, something to be brought to the forefront, and you want it to be better for the next generation to come, or the next students to be able to pick up where you left off from and enhance that project. I've enjoyed working with underserved and underrepresented populations because I recall where I came from. And I know when I came here to Iowa City, that although I was in another city, the issues were still very similar. And we shared a lot of stories, we shared a lot of challenges that we needed to get through. And I also knew that as a young mother, and as a Black woman in this community, where oftentimes you have to look high and low for people who are in leadership positions that look like you, to speak on your behalf, it was very few. And so I wanted not only to be a role model, but I wanted to show that just because you came from a situation did not mean that your voice was silenced, and that they were just impactful. They had just as many wonderful ideas. And working in nonprofit, you have to write for grants and you have to do all these things, but it only made sense if you were doing it based off of what the needs were of the people that you were serving. And I wanted to make sure that they were at the table, whether it was a young mother, a father, or a youth. Like, what was it? If it was culturally responsive, if we weren't adding more trauma to their lives and so forth. And so that's why I continue to do the work. And I definitely encourage any student on campus to venture off campus, because people live here. Like, it's not just a campus town, but this is where people live at, and they're raising their families, and they may end up staying for a very long time, like I chose to do, but you still can make a difference with the work that you do.
Well, and we're grateful that you stayed in the community, and that you, like Stacey, have chosen to be involved in our local government as well. That's a tremendous example. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Stacey, you have worked for other nonprofits and you've also launched your own nonprofit. I'm interested in how that transition has been for you and how that might have changed your leadership style between those two different settings.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm a firm believer in the concept of servant leadership, and I think the crux of servant leadership is doing your best to see yourself as part of the population of people you're trying to serve, in whatever nonprofit endeavor that may be. And in my case, with the LBA Foundation, or with my time with Case Foundation, or my work with the Boys and Girls Club, often the populations we were trying to serve were minority populations, underserved minority populations and communities of color. I am of that population, and it kind of dovetails nicely to what RaQuishia was saying. It's important that there are models of success in place where people can see themselves reflected in leadership. And it doesn't mean that everybody involved in service needs to look exactly like the community in which they're trying to serve. But what I think it does mean is that we ought to busy ourselves providing a space for folks to develop solutions to the problems they face. And we ought to serve more as facilitators than as instructors. And this is how things ought to be. Our committee said, give me a place to stand and I will move the world. And I believe that to be the case with a lot of populations, the do-gooders of the world try to serve. We need to make space, and we need to hold space. And I guess I'll just kind of end by saying this. This sort of work, philanthropy, that's the theme, right? And we're exploring different iterations of what philanthropy means. At the core, it's giving back. It's doing what you can do to improve your community. There's a book by the English author Henry James called The Middle Years, and there's a passage that I love. It's become a mantra. And it is, we work in the dark, we do what we can, we give what we have. Our passion is our task, and our task is our passion, and our passion is our task. The rest is the madness of art. That first part, that first stanza, we work in the dark, we do what we can, we give what we have. I repeat that to myself often. And to me, it means that you don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to be incredibly well connected. You don't have to have all the right friends. You don't have to be anything outside of a person with a good heart who has a desire to improve your community or has a desire to help. And if that is sort of the northern light and you subscribe to a servant leadership, you're going to be all right in whatever field it is you pursue, whether you're launching your own initiative, as I was able to do with the LBA Foundation, or you work for the Boys and Girls Club or for the Case Foundation. You're going to be good if those concepts can kind of rule the day.
That's great. Thank you for that quote and for that reflection as well. I appreciate that very much, and I like that too. These sometimes feel like they've been relatively dark recent weeks, and it's nice to be reminded of the importance of what we can do. Brett, what a wonderful story coming from rural Iowa and being able to find a place at the University of Iowa, and then the honor of being named a Fulbright Scholar and the privilege of being able to represent the United States in Taiwan teaching English. That's a dream come true, and a dream perhaps you didn't even know you had at the time you came. But how do you think that global experience shaped your view of community advocacy and giving back?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So when I was thinking about what it would look like to go abroad, I always kind of thought about going to a big city or like going around the world and ending up in like Paris or in London. But I was placed in a small rural island in Taiwan that was actually smaller than the community that I grew up in.
My goodness.
So it ended up being very ironic in that sense. But it was really good for me. I was working in an elementary school teaching English to a group of 2nd to 6th graders. And I was thinking that year, like, what can I possibly impart on these students? I'm only going to be here for a year or two. There's not really any opportunities to build like really big programs or, I'm just a guest in their home. What can I do here? So I wanted to just get as involved in the community there as I possibly could and learn as much as I could while I was there, and realized that what I could do best was get people together and talk about, the things that they wanted to see in their community. I was working with a college there in Kinmen, Taiwan, and the students there wanted to have a writing group. They wanted to have a space to learn English and to have a conversation club. And so what we did was we brought all of those students together who were interested in learning English and writing together, and built up an organization that they could sustainably manage themselves over. And it's still running today, 5 years later. And so like, that's what I really take from that experience, is not to go into a community thinking that you can change anything for those members of the community. Think about how you can support the leadership that's already there. How can you build a sustainable group or how can you build sustainable systems for leaders who are already there? What kind of time, treasure, and talent can you bring to any given community to help them really build up themselves?
What a great lesson that you learned there. I'm curious, RaQuishia, what would you say you're most proud of in your own nonprofit and philanthropic work?
I would say for me is just identifying what the underlying issues are. Like, I focus a lot on I focus a lot on on young girls and women of color, and trying to figure out, what issues that we're facing, and boy, is it a plethora of those. And so when you look at what it is, and I think someone else mentioned, like, when you're passionate about something, you drive, and that becomes your work, and it becomes your day in and day out. And that's where I focus a lot of my energy at, because it just opens the door for a lot of other opportunities as well.
Thank you. Jonathan, you were one of those super student active kinds of folks when you were at the University of Iowa. You named several of the things that you were involved in. And I wonder if you thought before you came to the University of Iowa that the nonprofit world might be a place that you would work, or if you were inspired by some of your experiences at Iowa to move in that direction.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I originally thought that I was going to graduate from Iowa and work in the private sector, do some sort of like management rotation type program, and that would be the career that I pursue. And it really was through my involvement that I started to just develop awareness around just the plethora of issues that, again, even a place like Iowa City, we're facing, right? And local issues and global issues, right? And I think that's really where my perspective started to change, and that I started to see, oh, I can actually do something about this, right? Like, oh, I actually have ideas that I can contribute that I think are good, and that might help, move something forward, or drive, an issue forward. And what I would share to current students in particular, right, is right now, if you are in school, there's no better time to fail than now. There's no better time to learn than now. And so, you know, thinking back to like my own involvement, I think what I appreciated was the opportunity not only to just build awareness, but also to fail, to learn, because the stakes got increasingly higher. Literally the second I graduated from college, right? So I graduated from Iowa, it was like May 17th or something, and quite literally the week after, you know, I was starting my Teach for America training, and I had 42 high school juniors. Mind you, I was 20, I had just turned 22. I had these group of high school juniors that were incredibly academically behind, and I was now, right, quote unquote, their leader, right? So there was no room for failure there. The stakes were high, you know, but again, it was because of all of these experiences that I had on campus that I felt like, okay, you know, I can do this. I have enough background, enough context. I have enough faith in my abilities to rise to the occasion. So, yeah.
Good, thank you. Stacey, you mentioned that you don't have to be a millionaire or incredibly well connected to be philanthropic. Are there ways that you would recommend for current students who have a desire to help, could support the nonprofits that you are part of currently or other nonprofits in our community? How would you encourage someone to get started?
Yeah, walk in the door and ask how you can be of service, right? I guess send an email in this COVID world we're living in. I will also say this, and I know there are going to be folks who have different opinions than I do on this, but there is an entire Black liberation movement happening in this country right now. And the very fact that young people are in college right now affords them a certain amount of privilege. And if Black liberation as a movement is something you feel passionate about or that you feel like you can support, it is my belief that this moment in time that we're living in will be looked upon as a new iteration of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. If you believe in this movement, there are all sorts of things you can do using your privilege as a young person, as a college student, using your abilities to serve as organizers in your community, using your voice to challenge local elected officials to do more to advance the cause and the aims of this movement, and showing up. You know, there are lots of ways you can show up for people and for these sort of efforts that surround the liberation movement. And if it's not about Black liberation, it could be about anything. Whatever it is you're passionate about, you'll want to be able to look back on your time in college and look at all the pictures that you have on Instagram and Facebook and whatever, and be proud about how you used your time, your talent, your ideas, your energy, your creativity to advance the cause of something it is you believe in. So there's any number of ways. There's an entire generation of young people out there who have been able to turn TikTok into an organizing tool and to make really incredible things happen that have consequences for our everyday lives by being creative on TikTok. So there's any number of things you can do. You just really got to flex that muscle of whatever it is that's going to motivate you to get up and do something. No act will be too small. And it is always sort of that ripple effect of a lot of people deciding to do something that when taken together changes the world. Just get out there and start flying around and trying to figure out how you can be useful. It's going to click. It's going to work. You will find your place once you take that initial step to say, this isn't right in my community, I want to change this, or I want to be a part of this. You just got to get moving and it'll happen.
Stepping out of our comfort zones sometimes. Yeah, good. Brett, when you look back, and by the way, these are audience questions that I have pivoted to now. So when you look back at your time at Iowa, Brett, what's one thing you wish you could go back and do differently? And what's one thing you would never want to change about your experience?
Oh, that's a really good question. I got really involved in the writing scene at the university. It's an amazing place to be if you're an aspiring writer. So if I could go back, I would take more writing classes. I would just follow, like what Stacey was saying, follow my passion at the time. I think I was kind of stuck in a place where I was trying to be someone that I thought I should be and not lean into the person that I really knew that I was already, which was a creative soul who wanted to give back to the community. And I think, yeah, following that writing streak would have been great. But I really am glad that I got involved in the international programs department, that I studied abroad, and would really encourage, I know I mentioned this earlier, but I would really encourage students to look into any opportunity that they have to, see what's out there. There are so many different study abroad programs, whether it's in the States or in another country. And I think if I could go back, I might also study abroad more. So I'm going to give you two things I wish I'd done.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Jonathan, I'm interested in what your experience was like as a first generation student at the University of Iowa, and what would you say would be the major drawback of Iowa not having any more diversity than it does?
It's a tough one. I'll be honest, I had a pretty strong, great experience at Iowa. I think for me, initially, right, and I was one of the rare ones in that my first time visiting campus was orientation, right? So it's like, you will either like it or you're going to like it, because at this point, there's no going back, right? And I think thinking back to being a first generation college student, the most difficult thing was probably just those random aha moments where I was like, oh, this thing that I thought was quote unquote normal, because, right, like it was something that I was used to based on, my upbringing, etc., was not, right? I remember sitting in some classes and realizing, oh my goodness, like I'm behind. I haven't read XYZ book. I haven't learned about XYZ, right? And I think, that was probably the most difficult thing, was realizing how much catch up I had to do, and that's where the work began, right? Like I think I was fortunate in that I was able to get connected to different resources, whether it was the Writing Center, whether it was, student support services opportunity at Iowa at the time, right? Like there were so many different resources available that, I think at times it was a matter of figuring out, okay, like who do I go to for what, and then carving out the time and being okay, you know what, like today I don't get to go out, and have a little bit of fun because I have to play catch up, right? And, for me, the motivation was like, I'm getting out of here in 4 years, right? Like I'm committed to graduating, but the trade-off was, well, I may not be able to go to, the Saturday football game every single Saturday during football season because I have work to do, right? And I think maybe at times those were some of the more isolating moments. But for me, I really was focused. My North Star was graduation. And so it was, you know what? I am here to learn. I'm here to work hard. I'm here to graduate in 4 years, and nothing will get in the way of that. When I think about, the question on diversity, I think there's still a lot of misconceptions about, Iowa as a whole, right? It's interesting, even in Chicago, with so many alums from the University of Iowa, people oftentimes, when I say, oh, I went to Iowa, they're like, oh, wow, but you grew up in Chicago, and they'll think, whatever stereotype, right? Cornfields, etc. And I think, Iowa City and Iowa as a whole is just a place rich with culture. And I really appreciated what RaQuishia said earlier, which is Iowa City, right? And Iowa is not just the University of Iowa, right? There's so much more outside of campus. And I think oftentimes we put a premium on, quote unquote, the four walls, right, of campus, and don't look beyond that. And I think at times that inability to look beyond just the university does get in the way of bringing on, more diverse students to campus.
Great, thank you. One last question that I'll ask each of you to respond to just briefly. Although if it were me, it would take me a minute to decide what this is, but what's one book that you would recommend to those who are listening today that's been important to you in your growth and development as someone who's deeply devoted to nonprofit work? Stacey.
I can go first.
Okay, thank you, Brett.
I heard a talk by Michael Sandel a few years back. Michael Sandel is a Harvard professor, philosophy professor, and he facilitates these amazing conversations between people who believe different things. And so he facilitates those conversations live in person, and he asks really uncomfortable questions to his audience. And so he has this book called Justice that I recommend everybody read. It really critically examines what is justice, what is capitalism, what are free markets, and are those the best systems in place? That are these systems that we're using really the best systems in place for our communities?
Great, thank you. Who would like to go next? Stacey's still shaking his head.
I'll go next. I mean, I
Please,
think for me, just given everything going on right now, with racial discourse, I would recommend, and I'm actually rereading it, The New Jim Crow. Like there's just, it's a book packed with so much knowledge. I think it'll challenge your perspective if you're wrestling with what is my place right now, or I don't understand XYZ. I think it's one of those books that you should just read, because it'll really inform your perspective. It just, yeah.
I agree. I've read that one recently myself, and it's quite enlightening.
Yeah.
RaQuishia, have you thought of one yet?
I have not, but I would have to agree that one is one that you can continue to reread, and things will continue to jump out at you each time you read it. So I'm just going to steal that one for now, because I'm going down which book would I recommend? But yeah, that is one of them that I would definitely recommend.
Okay.
Stacey? All right.
Yeah. So I appreciate Jonathan for starting me down the rabbit hole in my brain. It was impossible for me to arrive at one book to offer our students. But if it is the case that you feel moved by this current moment of Black liberation that I think we're living in, there are a few things you can do. If you are a white person, it might be instructive to read White Fragility, and a book by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, to understand roles that white people can play in this unprecedented time. And then I'll also say this. So there are three things. James Baldwin is one of the greatest thinkers ever, and was an incredible essayist as well as a novelist. But he has a series of essays that have been compiled, and the working title of that is "I Am Not Your Negro," I believe. Just gives you an intellectual insight into what Black liberation was when he was alive, and he was around in the 50s and 60s. And it'll freak you out because there are so many parallels to now. And I think most people of color would tell you that it feels like we've been fighting similar fights for many, many years now. But Baldwin is a literary giant, and he is in the pantheon of great American intellectuals, and anything he has written, I would recommend.
Great suggestions. Thank you so much. And Holly tells me we have time for one more question. And again, just briefly to each of you, how would you encourage University of Iowa students, knowing that they don't have a lot of resources at this time in their life, to become more philanthropically minded?
I prepared for this question, Lynette.
Okay.
So I'll be brief and kick it off to my colleagues if you don't mind. The great Dr. Angela Davis said something like, what's the point of getting all these degrees if you're not bringing other folks along? I would encourage folks to meditate on that. We are in an enormous position of privilege to be educated at one of the finest research institutions in the Midwest. We have access to experts in their field. We are sponges soaking up all this information. If you are not actively thinking about how to use this position in your life to help other people or to pull people up into a better social station, then you're doing it wrong. And philanthropy, again, comes in all shapes and forms and colors and this, that, and the other. So think about that. Think about that. And you can extrapolate to Dr. King's now famous question. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And if you are constantly trying to answer that question, then you're going to be all right.
Thank you, Stacey. That's lovely. Brett, how about you?
Yeah, I was thinking back on my time at the university and not having very much money to donate and not much time to volunteer. So I really just suggest spending this time soaking up as much as you can, and knowing that in the future you can give that back to other people. Philanthropy is your time, treasure, and your talent. So you can focus on your talent so that you can give it back to people later in the form of your time and your treasure.
Thank you, Brett. RaQuishia?
My takeaway would be for people to not get wrapped up on philanthropy being about money. Like you said, it's your time, it's your talent, it's your treasure. It's much bigger than you are, but whatever you do, make sure that you leave an impact that will continue to lead for change for generations to come. Whatever you do, make sure you leave it better than when you came in. And that it's great. Like, you can be philanthropic in just about any area, and you're not limited to one thing. And so right now, like Stacey and Brett has said, like, don't limit yourself. Be great in all of it, but bring someone else along with you to be great with you.
How nice. Jonathan?
I would just say, take advantage of this opportunity. Do not lose sight of your ability to empathize with others, especially across lines of difference. Given the moment that we're in, there's just so much polarization. And right now you're in such a unique environment where you are literally surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of people, some of whom are similar, but many of whom might be different. And so put some energy to figure out like, what are those differences, and lean into that. And think about like, what can you learn from one another, so that when you enter, the professional space, so that when you leave the University of Iowa, you're just better equipped with stronger emotional intelligence to navigate the world.
What a privilege it is to hear from each of you and to hear those calls for action. Things that not only our students can think about, but that all of us can think about it in terms of how we spend our time and energy and our resources. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's really been a joy listening to your really profound insights. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Lucas DeWitt now to wrap things up for us.
Thank you so much, Lynette. And thank you all for joining us again tonight. I've been trying to go through all of the ing adjectives that I can to describe what I've been feeling throughout this event, and inspiring has been one that just keeps popping up in my head. So on behalf of the Student Advancement Network, students, staff, faculty that are in attendance for this webinar tonight, but then also on campus, I want to thank you panelists for sharing your insight and your knowledge, and to reiterate what RaQuishia had mentioned before, that philanthropy is much more than just giving back money. There's a lot of opportunities to give back to your community, give back to the places and the people that we have the opportunity to cross paths with throughout our time here as Hawkeyes, and then after we are done and graduated. So this concludes our conversation. Again, to reiterate, we really wish we could have been in person, but we are glad that we still have this opportunity to share this space, share this community, and hear from 4 amazing individuals and alumni from the University of Iowa to hear the work that they are doing. When leaving, you will be directed to complete a short survey. We would greatly appreciate hearing about your experience today, as this is our first time doing this webinar for this Hawkeyes Give Back with this new platform. So we would love to hear your feedback and your input. And I also encourage you to visit the foriowa.org page to learn more about upcoming events that are hosted by the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. But other than that, that concludes our presentation and our talk today. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And as always, on Iowa, and go Hawks.